So today we have a 2014 Honda Accord. It's here for a no start condition. The customer says they put the key in the ignition, turn the key or attempt to start it, and it won't crank, it won't start. And when I ask them how they get it going, they simply wait several minutes and try it again and it works. So we're going to get the keys out of the shop and start with seeing if we can experience the problem. So this is a keyless start system. It uses a key fob with a proximity sensor, obviously. And I also noticed that they have on the keys here a remote control. So it has an aftermarket car starter in it as well, and I'll be skeptical about that. So put the foot on the brake, and it starts just fine. Well, we're going to scan it and see if it's stored any codes that could help us diagnose what was going on. So let's try a network scan of this thing and see if there's any codes in it that'll help us determine what might be going on with this intermittent no crank condition. No codes in the engine controller. Okay, I'll pick up when we get to the end of this list. So it scanned 21 controllers. No codes in anything that I can see except for door lock body codes, power control unit ignition 1A, 1B, ignition 2, latch circuit error, climate control codes. They seem to be related. Now I had scanned this a few months ago when I was working on the backup camera, so we have a record of what was in it before. I'm pretty sure I did a network scan. These are all ignition codes, so I wonder if we have something like a battery connection or something like that problem. But the bottom line is there's no codes related to security, which I was expecting to find, and or the key fob that I can see. Nothing in the engine, transmission. Okay, so we'll have a look, bring it in the shop and have a look at the battery cables and connections. So here is a previous scan from April 2020, and it had those power codes in multiple computers back then. See, April 7th, 2020, and they weren't complaining about this no start condition then, so I'm not sure what's generating these codes. I'm going to write some of them down and check Identifix. So here's the report from April 7th, and you can see the codes in there, and here's the report from this morning, basically the same codes. So I'm going to take a quick look in Identifix to see if there's a common issue with this. So in Identifix, this B12D0 only comes up with the diagnostic flowchart, and it's interesting. The first step in the diagnostic flowchart is make sure aftermarket accessories are not installed, such as a aftermarket car starter, which could very well be causing this code. I don't think it has anything to do with the problem. I'm going to read this. So I did a visual wiggle test on the battery cables and connections, and they don't look too bad, and they're tight. And then I got in the vehicle to restart it, and I heard a definitive click from the starter relay, followed by nothing. Let's turn off the AC. Nothing. So obviously there's an issue here. Now, is it related to these problem codes? Put on the brake. I heard the starter click. Let's see if we got a conventional starter relay in this thing and we can try and manipulate the starter relay. So I'm doing a network code clear, and then I'm going to see if those particular codes return during this no crank event after this code clear process. So it's cleared codes from 20 controllers, and now we're going to start a code scan again to make sure they're gone. I just have the key on, obviously it's not running. And if they are gone, I'm going to try to start it and see if the same codes have come back. So a rescan shows no codes present in any controller. So I'm going to attempt to start this vehicle and see if those laundry list of codes, those B12, D0, D1, D2, and D3 return in multiple controllers. So the vehicle exhibited the starter click scenario again, and I was quickly looking at the schematic for this thing. The starter motor is conventional. The S terminal is fed power by starter cut relay number 2 after it's allowed to crank from starter cut relay number 1. And I imagine these two relays are controlled by the PCM and maybe security system. But I'm starting to lean towards just a conventional starter issue. If we go right down to the S terminal at the starter and we're getting power to the starter and yet it's not cranking, that would indicate that the starter is defective. While this is doing a network scan in the background now. It's not finished yet. I'm reading this schematic here. If we supply power to the starter cut relay terminal and this white wire, that should make the starter crank. And don't know exactly how this works. Maybe they got a theory of operation in here. Let's see if any of these codes came back. So I got a funny feeling that those codes, it hasn't finished the network scan yet, but they were in the various modules. Keyless entry, power seat, power mirror. So far no codes. 15 systems analyzed. What were they in again? Keyless entry, body electrical. They were all in body electrical. So I got a funny feeling those codes are being generated by the remote start capabilities of this aftermarket car starter and just confusing everybody potentially. So no codes returned even though this thing doesn't crank. So we're going to find the starter cut relay, this starter cut relay number 2, and see how accessible the starter motor is so we can check for power to the S terminal. So the starter lives under the intake manifold. That's it right there with the word Honda on it. And this smaller wire here is the S terminal, or the start terminal. So we're going to backpin that terminal and put a significant test light on it to see if it's lighting up that test light, and hopefully it acts up. One of the problems is if it starts cranking now, we'll be at a loss until it acts up again. So that's somewhat of a molded connector up there on the S terminal. So rather than trying to check for power, I decided I would put power there with a remote start button, and that'll eliminate the entire starter control circuit. So it needs a starter. So we're going to change this starter today. It should be here shortly. I've got the negative battery cable disconnected. I did test for a voltage drop on this battery cable here, up at the top here. And during cranking, I had 11 volts, actually 11.9 at the starter motor. So it's definitely a problem with the solenoid internally in the starter. There's one fastener here, as you can see, and one 180 degrees around the starter, which is going to be a challenge. But hopefully once we get the battery cable undone and out of the way, it'll be a little easier to get in there with a 6-inch extension maybe. Well, I got to give the Honda engineers credit. I was wondering how I was going to get to this bolt up here on the top of the starter, but this is what they put in there. And as you can see, it's accessible from the back of the starter. I couldn't even see that bolt originally until I started reaching in there and find, oh look, there's a long stud there. Anyway, that's 14 mil. The nut, the original nut on the starter battery cable is 12 mil. So we'll take off the easier bolt now. So there's a little bracket that holds the battery cable, and it has to be taken off the original starter and put on with this lower stud. So we're ready to put the starter in. Oh, it would be a wise idea to inspect the ring gear too while you have it out. There was no complaint of grinding with this thing, so I'm going to have a quick look at it and make sure that there's no damaged teeth. But there was no complaint. But it's always a wise idea to inspect it whenever you have the starter out. So there's the new starter installed. Battery cable reconnected, S terminal connected, cables cleaned, dielectric grease on the S terminal, clipped retainers back in place, and ready to clean the battery cables up top and see how this thing starts. So got my foot on the brake, hit the start button, and it starts. Try it again. Sounds beautiful. Now, just for the hell of it, I'm going to use the remote car starter to start this vehicle, and then we're going to scan it and see if any of those power codes in the body electronic modules can come back. So I'm going to do a network code scan. Mind you, I've disconnected the battery, so there shouldn't be any codes in anything, but there could be a code for battery disconnect or something along those lines. But we're going to see if there's any codes whatsoever in this thing. I got the key on, engine not running, or ignition on, I should see. Well, we'll pick up when it's finished this network scan. So it's almost finished the network scan, 19 controllers, and as you can see, no codes in any of them. So there's the system report. No codes in anything. So I'm going to turn the ignition off, remove the keys from the vehicle, lock it, and use the car starter feature to start this vehicle and see if any codes are generated by that event. So I've started it once with the remote car starter, locked and unlocked the doors. Unlock the doors with the remote car starter, and when I open the door, the car shut off as I expect it should. Now I've got it running with the key inside the vehicle and a conventional start. And we're going to see with this network scan if we've got any of those power codes that we've had before in the various modules. And again, I'll pick up when we get through this scan. Well, there you go. B12, D0, D1, D2, and D3. The same 4 codes in the door locks, HVAC control code, keyless transmitter codes, all related, in my opinion, to using that aftermarket car starter to start the vehicle. This is why they're a pain in the ass, because obviously they could lead somebody astray here, thinking that there's a problem with the power control units or modules in the vehicle, and you could be chasing your tail trying to fix it. That's why the factory troubleshooting chart says check for aftermarket accessories. So we're going to disregard these codes and make a note of it for future reference. Hope this helps somebody. Thanks for watching.